Grace Stevens, what an exciting afternoon that we get to hang out together. We are so passionate. We've just met. I've heard about your work through some colleagues, and I'm really excited because this topic we're going to talk about is so incredibly important, Grace. Like here we are in the summertime when teachers get to take a break, do all the things they need to do for the year. However, it's that just around the corner, September's
Mhm.
coming, right? And all of those
August for
emotions.
us.
Yeah,
I have
right.
friends going back to school next week.
Right, exactly. Right. And all of
Yeah.
those emotions come up,
Yeah.
right? About teachers in the classrooms who are, can we say, a mental health crisis in the
Yeah.
classroom? We talk
Yeah.
about children's health crisis. I want to say, hello, we have a teacher's mental health crisis. So that's why I'd love to talk to you today, specifically around boundaries, because Grace, women, caregivers, educators, what is with this, right? And so to get started, I just want you to share with our community your what you're doing is phenomenal, but I want you to share with our community what's your background, your work, and how did you get to where you are today?
All right. Well, thank you. First off, thrilled to be here. Love your mission. We had a nice chat about that offline. How my yoga journey started when I was 12 in the 70s, years before it was cool. But here we are. So I was a second career teacher, and I don't know if you know Dr. Wayne Dyer, but I always remember a quote that he has is that, life is like algebra. You get the same test until you pass it. And
Oh
I
yeah.
got the same test twice. So in my mid-30s, I was crushing it in the corporate world. I was a corporate VP who'd been very successful, met all the goals that I had for myself, financial, had the title, the house, all the things. And was completely
Oh
miserable,
gosh.
just overwhelmed, stressed, anxious, complete lack of boundaries, worked way too many hours, felt completely guilt ridden, was never home with my kids. I had waited a long time to have children, and here they were, and I felt like I just outsourced all of that, right? And when I was home, I was worrying about work, and I just felt like nothing got enough of me, and I really didn't feel like the
Mm.
corporate track I'd ended on had purpose. And so I really needed to make a change. I decided that I would follow my dream of being a classroom teacher. Went back to school, got my own classroom. By the time I was 37, magical. It was awesome. It checked all the
Mm.
boxes. I didn't study positive psychology back then, but in retrospect, in hindsight, it checks all the boxes, right? It has purpose, it has connection, it has flow state, it has,
Mm.
fun. It was everything for me. And
And
within,
love. A lot of
yeah.
love.
Oh, a lot of love, so much
Right?
validation, and so
Right.
much like just what a cool way to spend your day, right?
Yeah.
And then within 2 or 3 years, I'd created the exact same circumstances for myself,
Oh, interesting.
just completely overwhelmed, lack of boundaries, working too much, guilt ridden, vicarious trauma, carrying all that student trauma. I worked in a Title I school, underprivileged kids, take all that trauma home with me. Something really needed to change. And so I went on this deep dive to really just learn everything I could to change my own experience. So I studied positive psychology, I'm like a self-help junkie, let's say, did the
Yeah.
courses, the
Right.
seminars, all the things. And I really managed to kind of hack my own happiness. I'm kind of nerdy, I have to say, in this kind of brain science way. So I really went down the
Mm.
neuro linguistic programming route. Um,
Yeah.
but anyway, I got this set of habits. And so I worked in this Title I school, and a very small school. So we had the same kids, the same, only one grade per year, right? Same kids, same parents, same administrators, same lack of resources, let's say. And so we were essentially having the same experience, but my experience was very different. And people noticed that and said, how come
Mm.
well, somebody called me aggressively cheerful.
Ah.
But above and beyond
I
that,
love
like the
that.
kids gravitated towards me, the parents gravitated, like people were just like people with the best energy gravitated towards me.
Yeah.
And so I'd already been doing some writing, and I'd written a book called The Happy Habit, and on these scientifically validated habits. Anyway, a teacher said, why don't you turn it into something for teachers? So I turned it into a journal, then I turned it into a book, Positive Mindset Habits for Teachers, and then it kind of took off from there. However, when I became a teacher, I had this vision for my life that I would be a public servant for 20 years.
Mm.
but I knew was never going to have put in enough years to be that teacher who retired on full benefits and all the things. So I knew it was like, okay, I would have to, finish at 20 years and then go do something else to like fund my retirement. And that 20 years saw me through COVID, teaching online, getting the kids back into school for a year and a half after COVID. And so, in my personal situation, I was moving, I was doing a whole bunch of things. It had just come up to 20 years and I decided, okay, now's the time to step out. And I had never really had this vision of what I was going to do when I stepped out, but I really wanted to still impact kids. And I decided the best way to impact kids at this point is to help the teachers have a more positive experience. As we know, mental health crisis in schools, so many teachers burn out and leaving, so many teachers burn out and staying. Not helpful, not helpful for them, not helpful for students. My big thing is your energy teaches more than your lesson plans, right? How you show up really matters. We just know that from being a student, right? From thinking back to our favorite teacher, like, do we remember what there was on the walls? Or not really, but we remember what they brought, that they believed in us and they were excited and they were willing to, champion us and have fun and all those things. And so that's what I do now. I work directly with teachers. I do have books. I have online courses. I have a membership. I have other things. I have a podcast. So anyway, that's what I spend my time doing now. I do miss the kids, have to say. Probably going to go back to substitute teaching this year.
Right.
Because I miss the kids so much. I know it's not going to be the same as having my own, group of kids where you build that kind of community that is magical, but it'll be something. So anyway, so that's what I do now. And what I have been doing a lot of recently, is coaching teachers on setting boundaries. Back to school is the perfect time. I think we spend so much time worrying about, the theme of the classroom and the decor and getting the labels right and getting everything laminated. And we don't really spend enough time being intentional, saying, now, how am I going to protect my peace this year? How am I going to make sure that I can enjoy and thrive this environment at school that's so important, but without the sacrifice of my personal life? Those aren't, my kids didn't sign up for their mum being non-present emotionally for the whole year, and that's what it boils down to for a lot of people. So
that's amazing. So, and you grew up in England, in London, right? And then you came to California. So your teaching experience was in California, right?
It was in California. No, I grew up in London, and then I actually went to university in 4 different countries. And I ended up in Boston. Actually, I was on a business trip. I was working for an educational tour company. I was always going to be a TEFL teacher, teaching English as a foreign language. And but then I ended up working with this company, and then I went to their sales department, and then they moved me to Santa Barbara. Nobody is leaving California, right? And then I met I met a guy. Isn't it always about a guy? Met a guy, had my kids, and so, stayed. And then actually it was when my daughter started kindergarten that I went. I remember going to her. I'd never been to a school in California at all, but going in and, that day when you drop them off and you stay a little while. And I remember looking around the room, and it literally, like this tugging on my heart, like, this is what I wanted to do. And so by the time I had my credential and started teaching, I like to say my son and I started first grade on the same day. She was entering 3rd and he was entering 1st. And he and I went and had our different schools, different school districts. But we started first grade on the same day, he and I. So it was kind of magical. So all my teaching experiences in California,
Yeah, when you say this, reminds me of years ago when I was a kindergarten teacher, right? Exactly what you said. There's so, lesson, but I had taught 3rd and 4th, so kindergarten was new to me. So, lesson planning and getting all the projects and a lot of the cut and pasting and prepping the room and, because I was one of those teachers, like the perfectionist in me, as you say, no boundaries, right? I had to have everything perfect. I had to know everything about the kid or whatever. And then I had this moment, I got home. This is when I was living in Sydney, Australia, and working in an American school. I came home and thought, wait a second, I got to look after myself. Like they're
Yeah,
not going to care that I have all these things lined up. They don't know what they don't know, right? And
yeah,
it's more
exactly.
important that I'm fresh and excited and
Yeah,
still young, a young teacher at the time.
there.
So exactly what you said there. Your energy teaches more than your lesson plan.
Yeah, the vibe, like
Your
you can go
vibe,
into a classroom and
right?
you can do, even when people sometimes call me, a little woo-woo, which, your
Mhm.
people are yoga people.
Right.
So we're
Right.
down with that, right? I like to say I'm woo adjacent
Yeah.
because, I'm pretty
Right.
woo, but, like I said, I'm kind of a brain nerd and it
Yeah.
all
Yeah.
does actually fit together.
Yeah.
Um, but
100%.
yeah, you can go into a room and have a vibe check, right? You know when something
Yeah.
bad has just gone down in that room and there's tension.
Yeah.
And when you go in a room and there's like a chaos, nobody's minding the teacher. But you can know when you go in a room that, isn't always quiet, but kids
Mm.
are productive, collaborating, the teacher's walking around the room helping them out. Something's not going perfect. Everybody's patient about it, or like, yeah, miss, I got it. I'll help them out. Right. Like it's just a
Mm.
completely different vibe when the teacher's showing up as the best self. And when you're exhausted and just worn
Mm.
out, and I'm finding a lot of teachers, and I know because I've been there, like you just get so resentful. Like, oh my
Mm.
gosh, like after school, you want to go home and do something, but no, I'm on this committee and that committee and the other
Yeah,
thing, and
that's it.
well, who put you on it? Well, who said yes to it? Oh, well, I
Yes,
did.
right. Right.
I
Exactly.
did.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, because I think about now, right, as a teacher sub, what I'm seeing is these classrooms, Grace, different than when I taught years ago. The
Yeah,
behaviors are big, like
yeah,
they are big. And there's a few handful of children, say, in the school who have such power
yeah.
over all the adults, right? So let's talk about that. Let's talk about these boundaries. So it's all about like, yes, we can be woo woo and healthy boundaries and everything, but you don't always get to say what the dynamic is, right? About what the group of children in front of you.
No, for
So
sure.
let's talk about this. Why do you think we as teachers, parents, educators, caregivers, why do you think we struggle with boundaries in relation to sort of what's at the core? Because as you were saying before, like if you're peeling that onion, okay, yes, it's become almost like lip service, like teacher burnout and
Yeah.
exhaustion, teachers are drowning, stress. Okay, yeah, we get all that. But what's underneath that? You
So
know?
underneath that, that's a very kind of it's a complex answer,
Mm,
and but I'm gonna say that it's something we can all relate to because I don't think like a lot of people. One of somebody who's taking one of my coaching classes right now is such a great advocate for my work, and she's like, everybody needs this, and you know what? She works with nurses. So it's not just
mm,
teaching, it's those kind of
100%.
vocations that have typically been female, really, really just based on females. And so a lot of it's cultural conditioning, right? So a lot of it's cultural
Mm,
conditioning. Teaching attracts people who feel it's vocation. So
mhm,
not just a 9 to 5, right? I know, there used to be a joke like, oh, what's your favorite thing about being a teacher? June, July, August. Like that's not, we learn pretty quick. That's why I became a teacher, to have summers off. We didn't last very long.
yeah.
So we care so much. But we have this nature, is part of our nature, is to be people pleasing, compliant, right?
Hmm.
Many of us raised to just do what's asked of you, don't make waves. So we have that. We're very conflict avoidant as a whole. As a
Hmm.
whole, we want everybody just to get along, right? So there's this
Hmm.
conditioning piece. There's this, this gendered piece. I think there's a piece that we've done to ourselves is we've bought into this kind of collective myth that I
Mm,
call it the teacher martyr myth. Is that we've equate like, oh, the last car in the parking lot being the best,
mm,
right? Being the
yeah.
best teacher. Oh, they must care the most. They must work the hardest. They must be the best teacher. Completely not true. In my experience, for myself, the years that I managed to set healthier boundaries, leave school at a reasonable hour, not take work home with me, not drag vicarious trauma of students home with me, I was a way better teacher because when I
Mm,
was in the classroom, I was present, I was energized, I was patient, I was less eagerly triggered. So it used to always be that there would be one or two kids in the class who really, were going through it and had these kind of needs above and beyond, like just being able to function easily in a classroom, and I will say, yes, certainly in the last few years, I did teach after COVID. It isn't one or two kids.
Yeah.
It's a third of the class, right? It's a
Yes.
lot.
Yes.
And so if we don't
Yeah.
have good control over ourselves, there's this whole co-regulation piece, right? If we don't want to get nerdy about the brain science, let me just say this. I used to, when I would have a substitute teacher or a student teacher come in for me, I'd say, listen, the kids are like dogs. They can sense fear. Like, you know what I mean?
Yes.
And they
Yes.
can sense when a teacher is just going to be easily, triggered and take things personally and willing to get involved in, conflict with the student. That's a totally different teacher than a teacher who shows up calm, in control, knowing that not every day is magical, but, I can handle what comes my way. It'll be okay. That's a good teacher. And that teacher is not the last car in the parking lot, because they are taking care of themselves in authentic self-care, not in a like, oh, I'll go get a mani-pedi, which is beautiful, but that's pampering.
Right.
That's not really authentic self-care. I find a lot of schools are giving lip service to self-care without really contemplating what is it about our environment that would lead our teachers to need that so desperately.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
Without asking that question, what is it we're doing that's causing people to be so stressed and overwhelmed? So I think there's a lot of parts to it. I think there's fear of judgment. I feel that
Yes.
we really like, oh, I don't want to be perceived as not being a team player. I
Yeah.
don't want to be perceived as being lazy. I think we get easily guilted into things. I've been in education over 2 decades. I've seen so many programs get taken away: the drama, the art, the music, the science. Like, oh gosh, if I don't put on science fair, if I don't do astronomy night, because I know how to do that, if I don't do these things, the kids won't have it. And so, oh, Mrs. S, if you don't do it, they won't have it, which is, listen, lots of people are convenient. Nobody's indispensable, right? When I
Right.
finally left a position, my job was posted by the end of the day.
Yeah.
You know what I'm
Right.
saying?
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
so I think there's a lot of things to it. Some of it we've done to ourselves. Part of it is the personality that attracts teachers. And then part of it, unfortunately, is we get in this environment where everybody's working these ridiculous hours. It's kind of like the culture, and you don't want to buck the culture, especially if you're new and you're, in the United States, a big deal being tenured or not tenured, right? You got to do
Right.
everything asked of you until you're tenured. But then by the time you're tenured, like, you just got into the habit of it. It's just a bad habit
Yeah.
that
Right.
the average US teacher donates 15 hours a week, 15 hours a week to the school system, unpaid. How
Yeah.
can we not be resentful and
Of
overwhelmed?
course. Yeah.
So, and like I said, it's not resourceful just from a standpoint of it doesn't deliver for us, but it doesn't deliver to children. We don't want grumpy teachers. We
Right.
all
I
know
think
who the
this.
grumpy teachers were when we were at school, right?
Right. And I think about the pressure, to add to what you're saying there, the pressure from, because I can hear the teachers in the background thinking, okay, but Grace, you don't know my
Yeah, you
classroom.
don't know. Yeah.
You
You
don't
don't
know
know
this.
my admin. Yeah.
The admin, the parents are calling me. I have a third grade classroom, and parents are saying, why is my child not learning statistics and probability? Like the
Yeah.
pressures that we put on. And so all of that, it all makes sense. So you think about, okay, all of that. So what are from your experiences there, what are your top tips then for helping teachers and educate and kids yoga teachers too, right?
Yeah.
To set these healthy boundaries in a loving way
In a loving way.
that sticks. This is, like you said, this is not just like go for a manicure on Monday. No, something
Yeah,
that
exactly.
this
Yeah.
is a
Bubble
this
baths
is
are
a
nice, but
yeah, no, this is like a whole mindset shift. Thinking about your
exactly.
book too, right? What are your top tips for this whole
So the
mindset?
top tips, and they all do come down to mindsets. I mean, certainly there are strategies, and I can share a resource at the end for teachers that I have a free PDF guide that is called the Polite Teacher's Guide to Saying No. And it will give you scripts, and it will give you exercises, and it will give you everything, and it's all free. But you have to have that mindset shift piece first.
Mm.
And the first thing is that this misconception about what boundary is. So setting a boundary is not just, people think it's a very aggressive thing. They think it's about controlling other people. They think it's just about saying no. A boundary is basically you having needs, preferences, and desires. It's not just a non-negotiable. Okay, so maybe for a teacher it is, I won't take parent phone calls at home. I won't work weekends. Great, excellent place to start. But I feel like for a lot of people, it really, not to get all therapeutic, it is kind of like a worthiness issue. It's like, sweetie, do you know that it's okay for you to have needs, preferences, and desires and to communicate them? Like that's really an okay thing. That's part of the human experience. And recognize that every time you do say no to something, even if it feels uncomfortable for a minute and you don't want to live in that discomfort, and there are strategies to get over that, right? Always respond in writing is what I tell people. If you just get all red-faced and flustered, respond in writing, right? Just say, let me think about that and get back to you. Let me check my schedule and get back to you. Just buy yourself some time. But when you say no to something, you're saying yes to something that you want more. You're saying yes to being relaxed, yes to your family, right? Yes to feeling good about yourself, that you're not going to show up to school resentful that you spent 2 hours in unpacking the latest curriculum standards or going over some data that no one's ever going to look at again, right? Because it's checking some box on somebody else's agenda, right? Not if it has to do with students. For me, like I said, astronomy night, science fair, love that. I'm not saying only work your contract hours. I love that because doing things with students really filled me up. It was the other things that drained me. Okay, so that's the first thing I would say is the mindset piece is you are worthy of having need, preferences, and desires, and recognize that every yes or every no is a yes or a no to something else, right? Kind of make that connection. The second thing is, get some skills. Nobody taught us how to set boundaries. We don't have a class on how to set boundaries at school. There are some very simple rules. The rules would be always understand it's about your behavior, right? It's not about controlling other people. It's what I'm going to do, right? This is what I'm going to do because we can't control other people. We know this, right? So get some skills, learn some basic skills, some scripts. The first thing I always tell people is, just buy yourself some time. That's the easiest strategy, is just like, let me look into that and get back to you. Or let me check my other commitments and get back to you. Because I find a lot of times what happens is, and it might just be out of convenience, it might be a little bit of manipulation, but every time I agreed to something that I didn't want to do, it's because I was flustered. I was on my way back to the classroom. My hands were full, the cup, the keys, the copies, the kids are in line. We know that that's like, oh my gosh, like those kids are in line, unscheduled, unstructured. That's where the drama happens, right? And so and somebody will come up and they'll start with a compliment. Oh, Mrs. S, this will be the perfect opportunity for you. Like, yeah, what is it? Right? And then, oh, but I've already put your name forward. That happened to me a lot. Like, I already put your name forward, and I would have to learn to say, you needed to check with me first. And, at one point when somebody repeatedly told me, but I've already put your name forward, I had to say in a nice way, that's really not my concern. Like that, you got to fix that yourself then. That is not something I did. So get some skills, which can be learned. And then I would say really just have this vision. Understand that it is a loving thing to do. Here's how I like to explain boundaries. People say, oh, it's a fence. It's a line you shouldn't cross. I like to think of a freeway. Okay, so on the freeway, you have that guardrail, right? So that you won't go over the side. Okay, so that keeps you safe. That is a boundary. But that's a non-negotiable, right? That's a non-negotiable. No one's going to cross that. And people think those are only boundaries. California, I'm sure probably in Canada, these freeways are 7 lanes deep. If we didn't have markers in the road where the lanes were, there would be chaos, right? People need to know where they're going before they get to that guardrail. You cannot get mad at people for cutting in your lane and causing chaos if you've never communicated where those lanes are. And those lanes are the needs and the preferences, right? And the desires before you get to that boundary. Because if you've never set any boundaries or never communicated any of those things, and people get to the guardrail and suddenly it's a hard stop, that's a very abrupt boundary. And so that, I think, is getting to the habit of, and don't start with the thing that stresses you out the most. Because here's the thing, it tends to be, I hate to make a generalization, but it was certainly true in my life, that I struggled to make boundaries at school or at my previous job. I struggled to set boundaries anywhere in my life. It was part of a bigger problem, right? And so it was part of learning to set loving boundaries in my home. Now,
Yes.
you're not going to start with the biggest thing that bothers you the most, right? You're not starting with a high stake thing. You're going to start with, get your little training wheels, start on some smaller things. When people say to you anything like, oh, I remember this was always a big one for me, was, oh, what do you want us to do for your birthday? Oh, nothing, I'm fine. And guess what? I'm like, oh, I don't mind. I really did mind that I was the person who did so much for other people for their for their birthday and organized and made them feel special. And like, y'all couldn't even get the kids to make me a card. Like, come on, right? And so it was the breeding ground of resentment. Right? It was just, it wasn't just school. And so I can't be mad at people for not knowing how to read my mind. Right? The loving thing to do is let people know in an easy way before it becomes a huge deal. So I certainly don't want people to take away from this like, oh, I'm a boundary boss. Now I'm going to, put up guardrails everywhere. You got to start with the small stuff, get some confidence, find your voice. I have, particularly in, this guide that hopefully will make available for people, it has some language. Here's a script for this. That's my voice. You don't talk like me. But it has the basics like use I language. It's about what I'm going to do, not what I'm expecting other people to do. So those would kind of be my tips, is like, just don't start with the big stuff. Understand that it's probably an issue bigger than just, people you work with students, with parents, with people you report to. It's probably something that could do with some attention in enriching all parts of your life.
Mm-hmm. So what I'm hearing from you, Grace, is that this is a holistic approach. This is not just in the classroom. This is in all of our relationships at home, in the classroom, but also with our colleagues, with our friends, our family. It's all of it. And so I think, like you said, is coming from the point of view of we are enough.
Yes.
And we're worthy, right?
We're
and so
worthy.
that's the thing, is starting our day every day, even this summer or during holidays, is to think about having those mindful moments of reflection, thinking, how can I show myself I am enough, right? And have those, and coming from that core, and then working out from there. So you say incremental steps. What in my life is draining me? That's what I'm hearing when you're talking about the guardrails and in the freeway. I think of it down a river. It's always for some reason it's been like that, right? So you think about, if you're in a boat, you're either flying from side to side, hitting the boundaries, hitting the side of the river, or you're cruising down the middle in between, or you're fighting against it, right? So you're trying to go upriver and the current is going against you. But how do we have that flow state in a river, say? And thinking about, we're worthy, small incremental steps. What are our desires, our preferences, and our needs? Right? And just start embracing that. It being like, we're human. How human of me.
Yeah,
right?
no, human first.
Human first.
Teacher second. Absolutely. Yeah. I am finishing up a chapter on my latest book, and one of them is, it's something that I have struggled with a lot as somebody who has, recently slept away from what brought me. Huge, kind of vision for my life is to learn and to teach. And I still teach adults, but, this whole idea of separating your worth from your work, right? Yeah. Even if I never taught another child again, right? I would still have intrinsic value to the world, right? And I think that's what I say for people who don't want to set boundaries, is there is this worthiness issue at the bottom of it. Is there some part of you that doesn't feel that you're worthy of having needs and preferences that are respected by other people,
Yeah.
right? The world has enough martyrs. It's
Right.
not
Right.
resourceful. Other than the
Right.
fact it is ruining your mental health, it's
Right.
just not resourceful. It
Yeah.
doesn't deliver. And so it isn't our fault that we weren't taught these things, right?
Mm.
At all. But it is our responsibility as adults to like, okay, let's set, not even just to set better examples for, like in my own life, I really wanted to set a better example for my own children.
Mm.
And as far as, just being this super compliant, like kind of, I wouldn't say I never really had a victim attitude, but you feel that way sometimes. Like, come on, man, like that. My mum would always say, slap a little lipstick on it. Like,
Yeah.
come
Right.
on, right? Like,
Right.
very,
Right.
we didn't talk about our feelings. We were British, but
No,
at the same
exactly.
time, it was kind of like, come on, get on with it.
Yes.
But I feel that, it is that kind of take some time for some reflection and to think, what is it that I like to do?
Mm.
Otherwise, when you are no longer in some of your very, the roles that you really identify with, teacher,
Mm.
parent, spouse, when some of those things, if some of those things come to an end, and if some of those all come crashing together, like happens for some
Mm.
people, empty nest as you retire, realize you have nothing left in common with your partner, suddenly like, what do I like to do? I don't know. I haven't asked myself that question in 3 decades.
Right.
I see it's a
Right.
very, it's kind of,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
anyway, so it is all part of the same issue, but it does start with setting some boundaries. And people,
Mm.
it's a very big buzzword now, but people might not even, they don't make the connection necessarily with the dissatisfaction and the stress and the overwhelm that they're
Mm.
having in their life, and how that has really ties into, okay, well, it's because I'm not comfortable setting healthy boundaries. I'll
Yeah.
just keep giving and giving and giving, or I'll keep working harder and harder and harder, and that'll fix it. It
Right.
doesn't.
And one of the things that we talk to children about, right, is what we
Yeah,
can control and what we can't
we can't
control.
control. Yeah,
Right. So you
exactly.
think about, especially here in the United States, we can't control the way the system is
Yeah,
built. And I hear so many of my colleagues and our community talking about, well, I've got so many years until I can retire. Right. And
yeah.
so we can't control that. That's the system in which we've chosen to work in.
Mm,
Right. Or you can't control who the children show up in your class. You
yeah,
can't control who your principal is.
yeah.
Where we are here, the teachers can't even leave the district or they'll lose their pension. So, that kind of
Oh,
thing. So,
wow.
yeah, I don't know if that's everywhere here, but that's what it is here. So, in any case, there are some things you can control, and some things you can't, and some committees you have to be on, and some meetings you have to attend. But what we can control, back to your point about your energy
Yeah.
teaches more than your lesson plans or anything that is happening in your class. What can we do? No kidding. How can we change our experience of our teaching life?
Teacher. Yeah,
We
exactly.
owe it to ourselves, we owe it to the children, we owe it to our families because we
No,
don't
absolutely.
want a situation where we're all in on the classroom. We come home and we're so burnt out. Parenting is just that's done. Or we're so in with our family, we get to school and then we're so burnt out, right? It's
Yeah.
really about embracing. And then a lot of us, not only families, but we have our caregivers to
Yeah. Aging
elderly
parents. Yeah.
married parents and everything. So what would you say to sort of how to bring this all together, Grace?
Yeah.
What is your advice that you talk to, educators who desperately want to love their jobs again? How many times do you hear this, right? I
Yeah.
want to love my job when I first started, right?
Yeah.
How do we help these folks? How do you get them back to loving their jobs, gaining back their energy? Energy
Mhm.
is something that's definitely spoken about. People feel drained or
Yeah.
drowning is what I hear all the time. And how do we help them take back control of their time? I'm exhausted. I have no
Yeah.
time. I'm up at 5. I got to get my kids ready. I have to make lunches. I go to school. I come back. I got to drive them over to sports. And then I have to do report cards and then the parent emails.
Yeah.
And then I'm in bed by 11.
Yeah. And then yeah. No, it's real. So first off, all of that is real, right? You can't invalidate other people's experience. Like I lived it. And with all I know and all I teach, I still would go through waves of just like, oh my gosh, this is crazy. So I would say I came up with this framework. I've been talking, writing about these things for many years, but I put it really down to a 4-step framework. We all love our kind of acronyms, right? The
Yeah.
teachers. So I have an ECHO, what I call an ECHO framework for educator empowerment. It's ECHO. And the E part is your energy teaches more than your lesson plans. So that's where we're starting, right? How you show up matters. Oh my gosh, more than, you can get away with not having. I remember during COVID, like making those, we had Google Classroom. Was my Bitmoji, one of the district standards, was have a cute Bitmoji on all your slides and this and that. Like, did that really facilitate learning? Right? Was it better that I showed up like, hey, how are we doing today? Let's have fun. Let's do, just willing to really get into it. So your energy teaches more than your lesson plans. The C in the ECHO framework is absolutely that. Control what you can control. You will we know this, the more we worry about everything, the less our locus of control is. We can control what happens in our classroom where it really matters. Like I like to say, I listen, 20 years, I saw fads come and go. This is our big focus this year. And then you never hear about it again, whatever. It's like, I would always say, I'm a kind of person, take what you need and leave the rest. Don't stress out about the rest. Don't complain about the rest. Take what you need. When I close my door, I'm a revolutionary. I know what kids need to learn. Right? It's pretty simple. They need to learn to read and write and, care and have a community and whatever. So control what you can control. And what happens in your classroom, for the most part, you have some control over, right? So control the things you can control. The H part, or H, as I would say if I was in England, is this whole idea that, my whole book was about happiness can be synthesized, right? I did not wake up. I was not born into a family with that kind of half glass full gene, right? A lot of mental health problems in my family, anxiety, depression. I really dug into the science in that, and that 40% of what comprises that is those habits, right? The gratitude, the mindfulness, right? All those things, okay? So recognize that you have control over a lot of that. How do you integrate those habits into your classroom? I always had a joy jar. I would do breathing and mindfulness with my kids, right? All those things, right? You have control over that. You can find 5-10 minutes a day to do that. So I always say it starts with a decision. So the decision is, because that comes to my last piece of the ECHO framework, and that O is other teachers' experience doesn't need to be your experience, right? Have your own experience. And that's what I did, and that's what other people noticed. We have all the same raw materials here. Kids, parents, curriculum, no drinking water. I know, school in California, crazy, right? Like, why are you having a different experience? Why are you eliciting different behavior out of the same kids, the same parents? Why do you seem to be having more fun? I'm having my own experience, right? Teaching is really difficult. And I'm not somebody who's going to say every day was magical. There were plenty of days where teaching brought me to my knees. But I would get myself together and I'd say, other people's experience doesn't need to be my experience. I get to have my own experience. I have control over that. And like I said, it goes back to that whole piece with the boundaries. It's about my behavior. I think to pull it full circus, let's just give an example with a boundary. Like I noticed that somebody would say to me, I'm getting better at boundaries. I was in a meeting and my partner that I have to work with, right? There's all strategies for avoiding, negative people who bring you down. But sometimes you just got to work with the negative people, the people who are difficult. It's like I tell the kids, I don't want to work with them. Guess what? You're going to grow up. You're going to have to work with people you don't want to work with, right? You find a way with it. And this person said to me, I set a boundary. I told them, it's not okay when you talk to me that way. Okay, well, good start. I'm like, but it's not about that person's behavior. It's about your behavior. The response I would coach you to eventually is, I feel disrespected and that my feelings aren't, that my ideas aren't, appreciated or valued when you talk to me that way, right? So it's about how I'm feeling. And I am unwilling to continue a discourse, a meeting with somebody who is raising their voice, talking disrespectfully. I'm going to extricate myself right now, and until we can, continue in a more productive problem, solution oriented way, whatever. It's about my behavior. I feel this, you're not attacking a person, you're doing this, you're doing that. It's like, I feel disrespected right now, here's what I'm going to do. And then it's okay, to do that. You're not slamming down a phone on somebody or slamming doors on the way out. You're just like, I feel it might be more productive to follow up, continue this meeting maybe by email when we've had a chance to take some emotion out of it and get our thoughts together.
Yeah.
Also when you're doing it in writing, you have a paper trail just in case you need it, right?
Yeah.
So it's that. I would say really for me, it's those 4 parts of that echo framework. My energy is the most important thing. Control what I can control. Realize happiness can be synthesized, and there are habits I can participate in and draw into the classroom. And other people's experience doesn't need to be my experience, because the collective narrative around teaching right now is so negative. Oh, we're overworked, we're not respected, we're political pawns. Everybody, especially, I don't know, in California, we hear this a lot. We always balance the budget based on education, right? If we got money in our budget, we get resources. If California doesn't have money in their budget, class size reduction, that goes out the window, right? It's the first thing that kind of gets trampled on. We can't control that. That collective narrative, maybe some of it's true, maybe a lot of it's true, but it doesn't change in my little kingdom.
Yeah.
With my students, with the magic I can create, with the way I can make my students feel that they can be, they can learn. I value them. I believe they can be successful. I'm committed to their success. That has nothing to do with any of that.
Yeah. I love it.
And that's really what was always important to me when teaching.
I love it. Grace, I could talk to you all afternoon.
Yeah.
It's just amazing. So how do we find you online? How do we...
Okay, so it's very simple. People say, what are your socials? I'm really not social. So there you go. That was easy. GraceStevens.com, and it's Stevens with a V. So Stevens. I have a podcast called Balance Your Teacher Life. You can find that anywhere you like to listen to podcasts. And that's really it. I do have the resource. Maybe you could put it somewhere in the notes somewhere. If you just go to gracestevens.com/say no. Say no. And that, like I said, it's a PDF guide. It's like 25 pages or something. It's about ditching one duty. It's going to walk you through the whole steps of let's find the duty that's stressing you out the most. Let me help you kind of how to either say no to it if it's nothing really about your job. But if it's adjacent to your job, let's say you're a music teacher and you're expected to put on concerts, or you're a science teacher, science fair, whatever. If it really is part of your job, how do you say yes and yes with limitations? Yeah. So anyway, so I think that's a helpful resource for people.
Excellent. And your book also on Amazon?
Positive Mindset Habits for Teachers. You can find it any online retailer. I have some others, but that's probably the most popular one, the most easy to digest. It's short, it's actionable. It has these 10 habits that help synthesize happiness. And more importantly, at the end of each chapter, it says how you can incorporate it in your classroom, because that's where you're spending most of your time.
Yes. So wonderful. Thank you so much, Grace.
My pleasure.
I've just loved every minute. We have so much in common and very like-minded people. So thank you so much for your time, my dear.
Thank you.